One of my favorite poems of all time was written by a bug. I feel like I should explain myself a little. Even for me, that's an odd way to start a video. Also, I promise that I will get to something practical and actionable later on. But if you're familiar with this channel, you'll know that that's not the only thing we do here. Anyway, the poem I'm referring to is part of a series that ran for years in the now-defunct Evening Sun newspaper beginning in 1916. The story goes that one day, columnist Don Marquis went to his typewriter to see a page he didn't remember typing up. Upon reading it, he discovered that it was written by a person calling themselves Archy. Or, no, person isn't quite accurate. Archy had been a person, in a previous life, a free verse poet, to be specific, but he wasn't a person anymore. Now he was a cricket. But he still remembered his old knack for poetry, so he snuck into Marquis' office late at night, easy enough for one of his size, and started typing away by hopping from key to key. Of course, being only able to hit one key at a time, he couldn't hold shift for capital letters, so the entire poem was in lowercase, but aside from that, it wasn't bad. So an agreement was brokered. Archie would type his poems late at night, and Marquis would get them published in the Sun. Thus began a creative partnership that, as far as I've been able to tell, lasted all the way to Marquis' death in 1937. Except, not really. I regret to inform you that Santa isn't real and these poems were not written by a sentient cricket, rather being written by Marquis himself. Still, that doesn't change the fact that these poems, collectively referred to as the Archie and Mehitabel stories, are a great read. Mehitabel, incidentally, is Archie's closest friend, an alley cat who is allegedly the reincarnation of Cleopatra. She doesn't factor in the specific poem I'm going to be talking about today, but she's great. Honestly, everything about these poems is great. The idea of witnessing the manic hustle and bustle of New York City in the 1920s from the perspective of one of the smallest creatures living there is a fantastic concept. And Marquis does some fascinating things with it, as you'll see with the one I intend to show you. They're also just really fascinating time capsules of the world of a century ago. For example, this was at a time when the average American felt about France the way people who frequent my channel feel about Japan, so Archie is rarely, if ever, referred to simply as a free verse poet. He is, insistently, referred to as a vers libre poet. For another fun example, there are the inevitable hacky jokes about reincarnation, but they don't have to do with Buddhism like you'd almost certainly expect them to if written today. Instead, Archie blames his reincarnation on Pythagoras. Now sure, it's still fairly commonly known among ancient Greece nerds that Pythagoras believed in reincarnation. But you'd never expect that to be where a writer's mind went these days. But back then, Buddhism wasn't especially common knowledge. The stories are full of little interesting curiosities like that, as well as a lot of timeless reflections on life in general. And in most editions, the poems are accompanied by illustrations by the legendary George Harriman, creator of Crazy Cat, one of the very first successful newspaper comic strips, and thus one of the most important figures in the whole history of sequential art. So yeah, I recommend tracking some of these poems down, either online or through one of the many physical printings the series has had over the years. My personal copy is a hardcover from the 40s that I lucked out on and bought for like $1 from a Friends of the Library book sale a few years ago. Anyway, I think that's enough preamble. I won't read the poem all at once, since there are other things I want to talk about today, but I'll weave it through the video where appropriate. The poem in question is titled The Lesson of the Moth. Here's how it begins. I was talking to a moth the other evening. He was trying to break into an electric light bulb and fry himself on the wires. "Why do you fellows pull this stunt?" I asked him. "Because it is the conventional thing for moths? Or why, if that had been an uncovered candle instead of an electric light bulb, you would now be a small, unsightly cinder. Have you no sense?" "Plenty of it," he answered. "But at times we get tired of using it. We get bored with the routine and crave beauty and excitement." That's enough for now. Let's talk about the thing you more than likely clicked on this video for. What I'm going to do for this section is run through what an average day looks like for me, both my fighting game grind and, importantly, the things around it. Now, I want to make it clear off the bat that I am not what anyone would call an exceptional player, at pretty much any fighter. If you decide to follow my advice, it won't turn you into Daigo. My main goal here is to give you a framework for self-improvement that you can modify to fit your own specific goals. And my hope is that, in being someone for whom getting good doesn't necessarily come easy, I'm in a pretty good position to do that. Hopefully by the end of this you'll agree. Anyway, we begin, as all days do, at the beginning. Though already I have to cheat a little bit. Frankly, I doubt you're especially interested in what my equivalent of a 9 to 5 looks like, so I'm going to skip that part. Let's start in earnest where that ends. When I settle in for the evening, there are a few things I do pretty much every day non-negotiably. The order doesn't necessarily have to be specific for all of it, but it is for some of it, so I usually just end up doing everything in the same order each day anyway. The first thing I do, after decompressing a bit, is exercise. For me, that's 90 minutes of steady-state cardio each day, with additional weightlifting days on a cable machine I got recently on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. Trying to add a fourth day somewhere, but I'm not exactly sure how that'll pan out. Anyway, I usually just do the weights either in silence or listening to music, but for the cardio, I always watch something while I'm doing it so I don't go insane from boredom. For the last few weeks, I've been watching Hajime no Ippo, which is honestly insanely good to watch while doing fitness-related things. It's the kind of series that hypes you up a lot. I'm not sure what I'll watch once I'm done with it, but I may look for another sports anime in the hope that it has a similar impact. I don't know, drop a recommendation in the comments if you have one. Anyway, after my exercise has trained my body, I train my hand-eye coordination. What I mean by that is, immediately after I'm done, with maybe a minute or two, but not much more than that to cool off, I start practicing whatever fighting game I want to grind out. That may seem odd, but there's a reason for it. Are you familiar with the writer Haruki Murakami? Personally, I haven't read much of his actual work and don't have much of an opinion one way or the other on what little of it I have read, but every once in a while, a story about his routine when he's working on a novel will make the rounds online. Whenever he's working on a book, he follows an extremely rigid schedule combining several hours of daily writing with 2 hours of daily intense exercise. Regrettably, I have other things I do during the day, so I can't dedicate myself in the same way to my passions as he does, but I follow the same theory, the idea being that physical discipline and mental discipline go hand in hand. Granted, I do it the opposite way, starting with the physical exercise and moving into the mental stuff, because I feel like the monotony of physical exercise helps me enter into a more intuitive frame of mind. As for the fighting game practice, I also have that meticulously timed. The amount of time I actually spend on it may surprise you, though. 30 minutes. That doesn't sound like a lot, especially compared to the 2-ish hours of physical activity preceding it, but it's worked for me thus far. The reason being that, before I gave myself a rigid schedule, I would practice a game for hours in one day, hit a wall, then put the game down either for months or forever because I got burnt out. And that led to a situation where I wasn't able to absorb much other than the very fundamentals of any game because I wasn't playing with the kind of consistency these games need. So setting aside a non-negotiable amount of time that I have to play every day, even if it isn't necessarily a lot, gives me that consistency. And I've noticed the results quite a bit. I learned something new in the game I'm grinding out, which for the record is VF5 right now, pretty much every day. If that stops being the case, I'll add some time, of course, but for now it hasn't. After that, I hop on my phone and do some Esperanto practice. If you're not familiar, Esperanto is a constructed language that virtually nobody in the world actually speaks natively, but which I'm learning for reasons that you can find out about in a video I posted to this channel several months ago. For that, I use an app called Drops, which focuses almost exclusively on vocabulary. That works well for Esperanto because the grammar is so simple that it doesn't take long to learn. I use the free version of Drops, which only lets me practice for 5 minutes a day, which actually works to my benefit for reasons similar to why my fighting game grind is only 30 minutes daily. In fact, seeing the results I was getting from 5 minutes of Esperanto practice every day is one of the things that inspired me to build all of my self-improvement stuff around reasonable daily routines like this. After that, I journal. You may remember my journals if you've been around here a while, since they make an appearance at the beginning of a video I made about the game Passage about a year ago. Though I have filled out a few more since then, I'm proud to say. I don't try to do anything fancy when I journal, just a fairly straightforward list of the things I did that day with relatively little commentary. That's probably an odd way for a writer to approach journaling, but I mostly do it as a memory exercise, so I don't feel the need to embellish much. After that, I have 2 things to do that are a bit less rigid. Read something and write something. I don't set explicit goals for either because I don't think that would really work for me, especially with regard to writing. Some days are inevitably harder than others, depending on what I'm working on. I've heard tell that Stephen King sets a minimum of 5 pages a day for himself, but as a professional, he's able to write all day if he wants, and I'm not. I try to get at least a section of what I'm working on done each day, either an idea I'm wanting to communicate if I'm writing one of these videos, or a scene if I'm working on a screenplay. And sometimes I manage that, but sometimes I don't. It really depends. But so long as I do what I can to work in that direction, that's enough for me. As for the reading, what I read varies, from Moby Dick earlier this year to various magazines. I've been keeping up with the UK's leading film magazine Sight and Sound recently, to a collection of Western stories written early in the career of the great Elmore Leonard that I've been working through, to various books of poetry, to, at one point, the entirety of the seinen manga masterpiece Goodnight Punpun in 2 days. And if that's still too highbrow for you, over the following 2 days I read through all of Demon Slayer. Pretty much anything counts, in my opinion, with one caveat. No including whatever social media feeds I read during the day. That's probably obvious, but yeah, I don't count time spent on Facebook or TV tropes towards this reading goal. Mostly because the whole point of having a daily reading goal in the first place is to help keep me off of mind-numbing social media. After my reading and writing for the day are done, I settle in and take advantage of whatever free time I have before I get tired enough to go to bed. For me, at time of writing, that's mostly been spent playing a lot of Doom, since the year-end CAC Awards, given by Doom World in recognition of the best custom levels and gameplay mods of the year, were released a couple days ago. If you also play Doom, feel free to let me know your thoughts, but personally, I think this year's CAC Awards were extremely strong. Like, one of the best years I can personally remember. Anyway, when I do get tired enough for bed, I pass out, and the next morning the cycle begins anew. So that's the practical stuff. And I don't intend to spend the rest of this video problematizing that or anything. I'm not lying for the sake of narrative convenience when I say that the routine I've come up with is broadly helpful to me. And I think it has the potential to help you, particularly if you take the time to adapt it to whatever your personal needs and goals are. But it's that word help that trips me up a little. It makes me think of self-help. I've never read the book Atomic Habits. But from everything I can tell, the routine I've built is pretty similar to what's recommended there, a system of small incremental self-improvements without necessarily laser focusing on specific goals. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Self-help isn't all bad, it's done a lot of good for a lot of people, that specific book very much included from what I can tell. But that's not the idiom I want my videos to really exist in, or at least end up in. Sure, I want most of what I do to be oriented towards self-improvement, toward giving you concrete things that you can do to better your life in some way or another. But I want those things to come from somewhere more abstract, we'll call it. I don't just want people to act in response to my videos here. I want them to think, to ask questions. And for me, the operative question when this whole idea of self-improvement comes up is, why do you want to improve? Why do any of us want to improve? Scratch that. Why do any of us want? The poem continues. Fire is beautiful, and we know that if we get too close, it will kill us. But what does that matter? It is better to be happy for a moment and be burned up with beauty than to live a long time and be bored all the while. So we wad all our life up into one little roll and then we shoot the roll. That is what life is for. It is better to be a part of beauty for one instant and then to cease to exist than to exist forever and never be a part of beauty. Our attitude toward life is to come easy, go easy. We are like human beings used to be before they became too civilized to enjoy themselves. There's a certain tendency in particularly terminally online areas of media discussion. Honestly, at this point, I see it criticized orders of magnitude more often than I see it actually done, but I still see it from time to time. And that's the tendency to see every work as an unequivocal endorsement of whatever worldview it depicts. The writer wrote a character who believes this, therefore the writer believes this. If it's not obvious, I disagree with that way of looking at things. For one, works rarely depict only one worldview. And speaking from experience, I've written plenty of characters I would personally disagree with. Some I even find reprehensible. After all, good writing generally requires conflict, and to facilitate that, it helps to have characters who look at the world in fundamentally different ways. That word conflict is operative here, I think. This poem isn't an instruction manual. It's a debate. A dialectic, if you want to get academic with it. On one side, Archy, pragmatic and unemotional. On the other, the moth, passionate to the point of self-annihilation. And to me, the interesting thing about a poem like this isn't trying to figure out which way of looking at the world is right. It's to acknowledge that fundamentally every one of us contains a little bit of both worldviews. I definitely do. You probably do as well, though your particular ratio of cricket to moth may be quite a bit different from mine. We're all some distance from the fire. How exactly far that distance is varies from person to person. And I think in the process of getting at the heart of that, you can learn things about yourself. Not just what you want, but how you want and why you want. All things that I believe are intrinsically linked. As in, maybe you'll be able to better chart a path to where you're going if you can better understand why it is you want to get there. I can't do that for you. I don't know you after all. But what I can do is show you how I've begun to make sense of things myself. To do that, I have to confess to something. Remember earlier in the video where I glossed over what I did during the day and claimed it wasn't important to the video? Well, I lied. It is important. Vitally important. Truth be told, if you've been around long enough, you may remember that I've already told you this. I brought it up in a video I made about Virtua Fighter last year, but I didn't go into any real depth back then. That is to say, I spend most of every day taking care of my elderly grandmother. Functionally, that's my 9 to 5, though regrettably, due to insurance bullshit, I'm not able to actually be compensated for it as some family caretakers are, with my money coming from whatever jobs I can pick up on weekends and the like. I want to try to avoid making this the part of the video where I complain about my life. I'm not interested in turning anything I make into a cathartic rant video. I owe you all more than that. But it would be dishonest of me to not admit that it can be really hard sometimes. If you've ever been a caretaker, you know what it's like. There's all the unsanitary stuff related to her physical decline that I'd rather not get into. There's the fact that her memory is shot, which can sometimes lead to conflict and also makes watching movies with her an actively Kafkaesque experience. And there's the fact that she often lashes out of powerlessness in ways that are, frankly, mean. I try not to take it personally, but it's hard not to, at least a little, when you've got someone yelling at you every other day, as well as frequently engaging in behavior that some psychologists would class as emotional abuse, though the context obviously problematizes that. On her worst days, honestly, it sometimes feels like she wants my life to be worse because she's unhappy with her own life. And I know that's not true, but it definitely feels like that a lot of the time. So yeah, I don't think it's pointless kvetching to say that my life can be a little rough sometimes. But it's partly that roughness that has put me on the path I'm on, probably for the better. Because the situation I ended up in is the kind of situation that makes you ask tough questions about what you want your life to be like. That is to say, seeing another life near its end up close. I live every day with a reminder of the inevitability of frailty, both physically and mentally. Sure, it can take different forms, and I think my grandmother has among the most severe in both cases, but I will not be the way I am now forever. And I want to take care of myself so that I can make the most of my physical and mental prime while also staving off the worst effects down the road, at least as much as genetics will allow. That's why I exercise so much and go through the cognitive effort of learning a language I will probably never use practically. In that way, I think my worldview is pretty far from the moth. In spite of seeing how painful a long life can be sometimes, I still want to live. For a while, if I'm able. I don't just want to throw myself into the fire all at once. But I still want there to be a fire. And I want to sit close enough to it that I can be warmed by it, even if I get a little singed sometimes. I want to have things to be passionate about, things I'm willing to endure real tribulation for. I've seen what the lack of that can do to somebody. And as I've said elsewhere on this channel, since I was 13 or so, for reasons that are still hard for me to fully articulate, chief among those things for me has been filmmaking. So I've done everything I can to make that happen. And I've had some success. I've made a feature, and this channel is doing pretty well now, which is a type of filmmaking to me. I actually do more editing now than I ever did in film school. But the tricky thing about making art is that it's subjective. It can be hard to tell when something is going well or not. Using this channel as an example, honestly, while I'm proud of all my videos, I'm pretty surprised sometimes at which ones end up doing well. Like, I think generally speaking that I'm becoming better at filmmaking the more I do it, but I don't actually know that for sure. And the thing I use to counter that rudderlessness is fighting games. Something where I know how well I'm doing based on whether I win or not. And unlike most other kinds of competitive games, something where I know I won or lost entirely under my own power. That's why fighters are so vital to me, even if they're not my main passion, and frankly, I'm not especially good at them. They're a buzzsaw that cuts through subjectivity for just long enough that I can keep my shoulder to the wheel. I know that for a lot of you, those for whom fighters are more central to their daily life, that might not seem like all that much, especially for an FGC channel. But for me, it's vital. And in doing all of that, I can keep flying close enough to the fire not to freeze to death. So there you go. That's an explanation of why my day is the way it is, extrapolated from the things I want out of this life. Your life is probably different from mine in a million ways, but I hope you see this as an invitation to examine where you find yourself in this world and where you want to be, and that it helps you begin to chart a path to get there. I'm not going to tell you that the trials and tribulations you go through in your daily life happen for a reason or whatever. I'm not omniscient. I don't know if that's true or not. But I do believe that all of us have, at least a little, the capacity to chisel the raw material of our lives into something a little bit better. All it takes is effort and attention and time. The ending of the poem ties everything together so well, Aristotle would call it surprising but inevitable, that I think I'll end the video by letting it speak for itself. Any commentary on my part would be superfluous, I think. But feel free to let me know your own thoughts in the comments. And before I could argue him out of his philosophy, he went and immolated himself on a patent cigar lighter. I do not agree with him myself. I would rather have half the happiness and twice the longevity. But at the same time, I wish there was something I wanted as badly as he wanted to fry himself. Thanks for watching.